Hi, I'm Andrew and welcome back to Plant Life Project. Well, 1 year ago I built a lucky bamboo riparium for my Betta, and the plant growth over these last 12 months has just been incredible, and I've added some plants along the way. But I've also had my share of problems with this tank, and I want to share with you the solutions that I found to those problems, but also just share with you what I've learned as I've observed this tank over the last year. The plants that I used for this build were, of course, lucky bamboo, but also dwarf sagittaria and variegated fig vine. Now, unfortunately, the variegated fig vine died. It was not growing inside the tank, but it was in a small planter that was attached to the outside of the tank. So it was dependent on me watering it. And of course, I forgot to water it a few times and it got too dry and died. And I decided against replacing it because I was concerned the same thing would continue happening. So I just decided against using it altogether. The dwarf sag and lucky bamboo have just gone nuts. Looking back at the original build video, I remembered this started with only a few sprigs of dwarf sag, and now it's all over the place. And the lucky bamboo has gotten so tall, I might be able to prune it down and use the cuttings to grow in the other half of the tank. Well, now let's go over some problems I've had, solutions that I found, and maybe some things that I would do differently. Shortly after setting this tank up, I started to notice a rainbow sheen developing on the surface of the water, which is indicative of an oil residue or petroleum-based product of some kind. And I didn't know if it was coming from the spray paint that I used on the lava rock, which I've never had problems with this paint before, just have to let it cure properly. Or it could have been a herbicide residue or something similar on the stones that I used. So to be safe, I just pulled all the hardscape out, pulled out the background, and I did several water changes, and that seemed to resolve the issue. And I never did try to clean and replace the hardscape or the background, I just left it out. Well, the next problem that I had with this tank started a few months after the setup. I moved this tank out to the greenhouse in order to make room for the next project. And in the greenhouse, of course, there's an abundance of sunlight, and boom, algae explosion. I had green hair algae, but also cyanobacteria, and it just covered everything. And so I started doing water changes several times a week, gravel vacuuming. Man, that got old quick. So I decided, okay, instead of doing water changes, I'm just going to try to block the sunlight out from the sides and throw in some floating plants. So these floating plants not only help block the excess light coming from above, but they also help replace the water changes. I can just remove excess duckweed and frogbit as they multiply, and in effect I'm removing those nutrients that they've taken from the water. To block out the sunlight from the sides, I cut out pieces of neoprene mat to fit each side, and that not only blocked the light out, but it also helped regulate the water temperature to keep the glass from sweating so much from the condensation that would happen as the greenhouse heated up and cooled down constantly. I did use hydrogen peroxide to kill off the mass of algae and did some water changes to remove that dead algae. And of course, I blocked the light out, threw in the floating plants like I described, and that seems to be keeping the algae under control. Now, before I started all this, I moved the Betta out of this tank and moved him back inside. It was getting way too hot in the greenhouse during the summer, and of course now he's in a different setup, which I made a video about recently. With this tank in the greenhouse, I did use it to propagate some other plants, like this golden goddess philodendron. And at one point I had some monstera cuttings that I had rooted. There's also now some cryptocorin, which is growing just slowly. I removed the internal filter when I transferred the tank to the greenhouse, and I used an air stone for a while, but now I'm not using anything. I'm just relying on these plants to filter the water. So what are some things that I would do differently if I were building this tank again? Well, I don't think I would worry about the lava rock background at all. And I would have been more selective about the stones that I use for the hardscape. wash them more thoroughly, bleach them, whatever, just to ensure that they were clean and free of any chemical residue. And instead of a 10-gallon tank, I think I would have used a 20-gallon long. That would give more space to create that lucky bamboo forest scape. And I could probably still do it with the 10-gallon, but I think that 20 long would really be impressive. Well, this tank turned out a lot different than my original intent, and I definitely faced some challenges with it over the last year, but I have learned a lot from those challenges, and I'm so happy with the plant growth. It always feels good to see plants that I've selected thrive in the environment chosen for them. And of course, these projects always give me new ideas for future builds. Well, be sure to check out all the links in the description, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and remember, it's all about the plants.